So anyway, we're in a series called Too Casual. What we've been doing in this series is going to be 6 weeks long. We started last week. We talked about the omniscience of God. Omniscience means that God is all-knowing. Omni, all, science, knowledge. So he is all-knowing. And today we're talking about his omnipotence. Everyone say omnipotence. Yeah, that was good. Man, you guys are really alert today. That's great. And omnipotence means that he is all-powerful. Omnipotent, that God is all-powerful. And today what we're going to be doing is we're going to take a look at a passage or several passages, 4 stories in Luke chapter 8 that illustrate the different ways that Jesus has authority in these 4 different stories. But I want to sort of set this up, first of all, by just getting you to think about how sometimes it's easy to be too casual with God. I know in my life, in my personal life, sometimes I get too casual with God when things are going great. Right? When things are going great, I like to think of it in terms of, I'm a math guy, sine waves. So if things are going great in my life, then my spiritual life can sometimes go like this. Because life is good, I'm on cruise control, I get casual with God. I'm not desperate enough to need God in my life. Some of you maybe would say, yeah, that is me. That things are going well, and so your spiritual life, you get a little casual in your prayer life. You get a little casual in your relationship with God, and that's happened to me. And what happens is it switches on me. And now when my life goes like this, and I'm in a crisis, I'm in a time of desperation in my life, right? I've got teenagers now. And so now my life goes like this. And now all of a sudden, it forces me out of desperation. It forces me, my prayer life steps it up, right? So for some of you, I just want you to think, is that how it works in your life? For some of you, you're too casual until you're desperate. And then when you're desperate, you finally turn to God and you say, God, I need your omnipotence. I need you to show up in power in this situation in my life, in these finances, or in this relationship, or with my kids or my teens, or with a health situation, or with an addiction. Some of you can understand that. Some of you even today are in that place where maybe right here in your life, you're in this time of desperation. And so I want to speak specifically to those of you today who are in this place. Some of you, maybe you'll have to just reach back a little bit into your past and think about a time when you were gripped by fear. Because today we're talking about the difference between fear and faith. We're talking about approaching God in fear or approaching God and relating to God out of faith. In my life, in the last few weeks, I have found myself begging for Christ to show up. I have found myself begging for his power in my life. A few weeks ago, I experienced something I've never experienced in my entire life. I woke up in the middle of the night gripped by fear and anxiety. Now, some of you deal with fear and anxiety in your life. Some of you have dealt with it maybe since you were younger. Some of you might be young. I know that anxiety is becoming a major thing with young people now. Like everyone deals with anxiety more than ever before. And I think it has something to do with social media. I'm not really sure. I think it has something to do with all the entertainment choices. I think it has something to do with not having real friendships anymore because we have Facebook friends or Insta friends or whatever, I don't know, Pinsta friends, you know. And in my life, I've never experienced it. And I found myself 3 weeks ago today, I was supposed to be preaching at the Brigham City campus, and I woke up and I could hardly move. I was so gripped by fear. And all I could do, and Tracy prayed for me all day long, and all I could do was just sit there in the largest room I could find in my house because it felt like the walls were closing in on me. And all I could sit there, I couldn't read, I couldn't have a conversation, I couldn't watch TV, I could hardly listen to music. I tried to listen to the simplest piano music I could listen to try to get my mind off of it. I couldn't even listen to music with lyrics. I can't even standing here today, I can't even explain what was happening to me. All I know is I was utterly desperate, and all I could do almost the entire day is just pray and beg God to take this away. What is this? Take this away. I know some of you, maybe you can't understand what I'm talking about. You can't relate to it. Trust me, a month ago, I wouldn't be able to have related to it either. I would have been sitting there saying, well, that's too bad. You're crazy. You're a little cuckoo. That's too bad. But then it happened. Some of you are here today and you say, no, I know exactly what that is. I've been through that, or I'm going through that now. And so today I want to take a look at these 4 pictures, these 4 vignettes in this passage in Luke chapter 8 that show us how to move from fear to faith. How to move from begging to God, begging for him to show up in our lives out of fear, which is where I was 3 weeks ago, to moving to this place where we're coming to him in faith and we're saying, God, I know that you have the power to do what only you can do. It says in verse 22, one day Jesus said to his disciples, let's cross to the other side of the lake. So they were in Capernaum, one side of the Sea of Galilee, and they're crossing over to the area of the Gerasenes on the other side of the lake, and they're crossing over there. And it's interesting as you read this to relate those 2 sides of the lake, as one side of the lake was the fear side and the other side of the lake was the faith side. Some of you need to move from the fear side to the faith side. It says that they got into the boat, Jesus and his disciples, and they sailed across, and Jesus settled down for a nap. I love this. It's so funny. So Jesus is sleeping. How many of you know that if you're struggling with fear and anxiety, you can't sleep? You can't sleep. Some of you are like, amen, I know that. I'm there right now. Jesus didn't have that problem. He settled down for a nap. And it says, but soon a fierce storm came down on the lake, and the boat was filling with water, and they were in real danger. Like for real, this kind of thing happens on the Sea of Galilee from time to time. So the disciples went and woke him up, begging. We're going to see 6 or 7 different examples of people begging Jesus. Like me 3 weeks ago, begging Jesus. And they begged him out of fear. Master, Master, we're going to drown. That is legitimate fear. Jesus woke up. He rebuked the wind and the waves after he had his cup of coffee. And it says, suddenly the storm stopped and all was calm. I just love that picture. They're all freaking out. And he's like, wiping the sleepies out of his eyes. Like, guys, come on. I was right in the middle of REM. Like, I was having a great dream. And then he calmed the storm. And then he looked at his disciples and he said, where's your faith? I think that's maybe what Jesus is saying to some of you right now. That's what he's been saying to me for the last 3 weeks. Where's your faith? Your response, you're pleading, you're begging me out of fear. Where's your faith? And it says here, the disciples, even after this, the disciples were terrified. They're still terrified. But this time they were terrified because they didn't even understand who Jesus was. They're like some of you today. You're still trying to figure out who Jesus is. You're still trying to wrap your mind around Jesus and pursuing God. And what is all this stuff that we're doing and the songs that we're singing and the stories that we hear, and you're trying to wrap your mind around who is this guy? And this is exactly where the disciples were. They said, who is this guy? When he gives a command, even the wind and the waves obey him. We got 4 things I want you to wrestle with today. Again, I hope you'll talk about this with a mentor or with your small group this week or with your family or your spouse or with your kids, because I think everyone can relate to this. And the first thing is this. It's easy to forget that God's in control. The disciples are there and the wind and the waves are crashing down and Jesus seems to be napping. And some of you in your life, the wind and the waves they're crashing down on your boat that is your life or your family or your job or your finances or your health situation or your expectations for the future or your career path or your college debt or your friendships at school or your grades or whatever it is. And all this stuff is crashing down. And what's happening is just what happened to the disciples is you feel like you are out of control. You have no control in your life. And the truth is, and I want some of you need to hear this, for many of you, fear comes from trying to control something. That's tweetable. I'll give you a second. Go ahead. Fear comes from trying to control something. I learned this 3 weeks ago as my experience kind of plunged me into reading books, prayer like I haven't prayed in years, talking to Tracy, talking to some other pastors and mentors in my life, and being vulnerable, by the way. It's really good, by the way, to be vulnerable. For some of you men, you're like, I can't believe this guy has anxiety and he's admitting he's afraid. Get over it, dude. You're going to have it too, okay? You're not as strong as you think you are. That's what I learned. You're not in control like you think you are. Because as I started praying through some of these things, I started writing out some things. I like to pray with sticky notes, and so I write names down on sticky notes or situations on sticky notes, and I stick them up on, I have a little prayer wall in my office, and I stick them up on the prayer wall, and it just gives me kind of a visual representation. It kind of unburdens my heart, and I can stick it up on a wall, and then I can look at that thing, and I could say, I'm afraid of that, and I'm afraid of that. And I'm anxious about that and that and that. And the man in me wants to say, you're big, you're strong, you can handle it. You're not afraid of anything. You're a real man. And then a few weeks ago, I realized maybe I'm not as strong as I thought I was. And maybe I'm not in control like I thought I was. And I don't know about you, but for me, sometimes I feel like some situations in my life I'm more concerned about than Jesus is. And that makes me mad. He seems to be napping in my storm. Jesus, don't you see what's happening here? My kid, my finances, my health, my mom, my kid, my millennial son. Some of you have millennials and you've been like, Jesus, you've been napping on my millennial. My millennial's been napping and you're napping now too. And for some of you, fear comes from trying to control this thing, and it's so easy to forget that, wait, hold on, relax, God has this. He's got this. He's still in control, even when it doesn't look like it. He still has it. And the more we try to hang on to it, the more we try to control it, and I understand because parenting, we're just coming out of those most active parenting times. 16 and 18 are the ages of our kids, and so I see some of you, and I laugh at you with 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds. I mock you in my mind because I'm like, ha, 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 I'm done with that, and you have to do that now, and I don't mock you, I'm just kidding. But I look at you and I'm like, I remember trying to control like every little thing and and you're not doing it because you don't love your kids, you do it because you love them and you try to control. And we try to push God out of the driver's seat and we try to take the wheel. It's so easy to forget that God's in control. Some of you have to admit today, that's where some of your fear is coming from. That's where your anxiety is coming from. You're trying to be omnipotent and you are not. God is omnipotent. God is all-powerful. And you need to depend on his power. One of the statements I've written on a sticky note that I've been praying for through the last 3 weeks is this, 2 statements. Confess your fear and profess your dependence. I've had to write that down to remind myself. Sometimes I have to write things down to myself. And I wrote it down on a sticky, and it's right on my wall. Confess your fear and profess your dependence. And every day when I go to God in prayer, and I'm doing it every single day in the morning before I do anything else, and that's the first one I look at, and I say, God, I confess my fear. I'm trying to control too many things. I feel like I care more about my church than you do. It's your church, not mine. He cares more about this church than I do. He cares more about your family than you do. He cares more about your marriage than you do. Your finances, your debt, your sickness, whatever it is, he cares about it. He's not napping on you. And I've had to confess my fear and then profess my dependence on God. Say, God, I depend on you. I admit it. I am not that strong. You're the one who's strong, and I trust in you. And so they arrived at the region of the Gerasenes on the other side of the lake, the fear side of the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus climbed out of the boat, and a man who was possessed by demons came out to meet him. For a long time, he'd been homeless and naked, living in the tombs. And as soon as Jesus saw him, the man shrieked and fell down in front of Jesus. And then he screamed, "Why are you interfering with me, Jesus? Son of the Most High God, please, I beg you." Second one, begging. Demons are now begging. First, the disciples were begging. Now the demons are begging out of fear. "I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had already commanded the evil spirit to come out of him. And this spirit had often taken control of the man. And Jesus demanded, "What's your name?" Not to the man, but to the demon in the man. And he replied, "Legion," for he was filled with many demons. And verse 31 says, the demons kept begging Jesus not to send them to the bottomless pit. Interesting. This is for another sermon. But even the demons didn't want to go to hell. If you think hell is kind of a kegger party, you're wrong. The demons didn't even want to go to hell. We're going to do a series on this, and in the next couple of months, we're going to talk about heaven and hell. So there was a large herd. If you know this story, Jesus sent the demons into that herd of pigs, and the herd of pigs jumped off of a cliff, and it freaked everybody out. In fact, it says at the end of the story in verse 37, and all the people in the region, the Gerasenes, begged Jesus. Third group begging. So the disciples begged, then the demons begged, and now the people in that region on the other side of the lake, they're begging Jesus, and they begged him to go away, to leave them alone, for a great wave of fear swept over them. So once again, out of fear, they're begging Jesus. "I don't get it. I don't know who you are. You're more powerful than," like, we don't understand what this is all about, but all we know is it's kind of freaking us out. Please go away. And the second point here is it's easy to forget, it's easy to feel helpless in the face of evil. That if you're confronted with evil in your life, some of you need to recognize that the thing that you're afraid of isn't just a physical thing, it isn't just a mental thing or a relational thing. For some of you, you need to realize that there's a spiritual component to what you're afraid of and what you're dealing with. In my own life, I had to realize that as I sat there almost the entire day, paralyzed, and all I could do was pray. And I'll be honest, so much it was out of fear. It wasn't out of faith. It was out of fear. God, I can't handle this. I don't understand this. This is not just an emotional thing. This isn't just a physical thing. I don't even understand what is going on, but I depend on you. I need you. I can't do this on my own. I've never been in this place where I felt so out of control. And some of you need to recognize that there's a spiritual component to what you're dealing with, and you need to go to God, and you need to say, I recognize that only you can save me. And you are not helpless in the face of evil, just like this man wasn't. And now we're going to turn to faith. It says, so Jesus returned to the boat, and he left, crossing back to the other side. But before he did that, the man who had been freed from the demons begged to go with him. Here's the fourth person begging. But it's a different kind of begging now. He wasn't begging for him to wake up. He wasn't begging for him to go away. He wasn't begging out of fear for the power that Jesus had. He was begging to be with him because he saw the power at work, the power of Jesus at work in his life. And so he says, I want to go with you. It's interesting. Everyone else in this town says, get away from me, Jesus. We don't understand this. But the man who had been touched, the man who had encountered the power of Jesus personally in his life, he said, no. He says, I want to go with you. I want to be with you. I want access to that power every day. Jesus sent him home. He says, nope, you need to go back to your family and tell them everything that God has done for you. And so he went through all the town proclaiming the great things that Jesus had done for him. In verse 40, it says, on the other side of the lake, crowds welcomed Jesus because they'd been waiting for him. So now he's back in Capernaum where he had started. And then a man named Jairus, a leader of the local synagogue, came, and he fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come home because his only daughter, who was about 12 years old, was dying. Any parent in here would understand the desperation of Jairus, this synagogue leader. He was so desperate that he would go to this carpenter's son who was a nobody in most of the Pharisees' eyes. But this guy was so desperate. He's like, I'm even willing to go to Jesus. And he says, if you would only come with me, I know that you could heal her. So out of faith, Jairus pleaded for Jesus to come. But we got to hit pause on that story because as Jesus started to walk with Jairus toward the house, it says that in the crowds were pressing around him, and there was this woman that was dealing with 12 years of constant bleeding in her life, and she could find no cure. In fact, one translation says she spent all of her money, all of her life savings trying to cure it, and she couldn't cure it. So she was at the end of her rope, and the Bible says that she thought to herself, if I could only touch the hem of his garment, then I would be healed. And she did. She touched the hem of his garment, and the Bible says immediately she was healed. How cool is that? And it's even cooler that it says here that Jesus stopped, and he said, who touched me? And the disciples are like, what are you talking about? Everyone's touching you. We're in a crowd. Like we're being pressed in on all sides by everybody. And Jesus said, no. Someone deliberately touched me. For I felt healing power go out from me. And it says that when the woman realized that she couldn't stay hidden, she began to tremble in fear. She fell to her knees in front of him, just praying that he wouldn't take away this healing she just received. And it says the whole crowd heard her explain why she had touched him. So she went through her story. She told Jesus in front of the crowd, which to some of you might seem humiliating. Expose yourself, expose your fear, expose your trouble, expose your problem. But she had to do it, and she told Jesus and the whole crowd that she had been immediately healed, and Jesus said this. Could you hear these words to yourself? Jesus said, daughter, your faith has healed you, go in peace. And you need to recognize here, I think what we're learning in this one is it's easy to feel hopeless in our personal circumstances. Those private circumstances that we don't want to kind of put out there. We're not going to put it on Facebook. We don't really want people knowing about our business. We don't want people knowing about our anxiety, our fears, our troubles, our financial issues, our relational issues, our kid issues. We have a millennial, whatever. You don't want people knowing. But look, I want you to know that you don't have to be hopeless over that personal circumstance. You don't have to bear it alone. The truth is that there were two types of healings that this woman needed. Number one, she needed the physical healing, but that was only half of the problem with her illness. See, her illness in her community made her an outcast. Her illness in her community made her unclean. So if Jesus would have said nothing when the power went out, if Jesus would have not called her out in the middle of the crowd, in the middle of her community, if Jesus wouldn't have pointed out that she had been healed, then nobody would have known that she was healed, and she would have still had the social stigma. So it wasn't to embarrass her that he called her out, it was to truly set her free. Jesus wants to truly set you free. Jesus wants you to have complete freedom from your thing, but you're not going to have it unless you come out. Unless you admit it, I'm dealing with this. And in faith, you come to him and say, and you come to his people and say, I need help. So we can hit unpause. So then we get back to the Jairus story. Remember his daughter, she was dying, and Jairus was desperate and saying, come to my home. And they were on the way to the home. And then they got interrupted by this other thing, by this other need in the community. Well, now as they start walking again, one of Jairus' servants comes up and says, Jairus, don't even worry about it. Your daughter died. Could you imagine what that would feel like in that moment for you if you were that father? I would look at the woman who just got healed, who stalled Jesus from coming to my need. And I would have said, how dare you? That's so selfish. If he would have kept coming, if he would have just hurried up a little bit. How many times have you asked Jesus to hurry up? Then maybe my situation would have been dealt with. But Jesus said, just relax, just chill out. Let's just go to your home. And they went to the home, and Jesus walked in, and he said, don't be afraid, just have faith. And that's the question here today for all of us. Are we going to respond in fear or are we going to respond in faith? Jesus said, don't be afraid, just have faith. And he went to the home, and there was the daughter dead on the bed. And Jesus said, no, don't worry, she's not dead, she's just sleeping. And Jesus went in, and he spoke over her, and he prayed over her, and she was raised to life again. That last thing I want you to understand is it's easy to believe that death is the end. But I want you to know that it's not the end. One of the things that in these last few weeks that I've had to wrestle with as I've been confessing my fears, which is very therapeutic. I've never really done this before. I think I've always been too much of a man. I've always thought I was too strong in my own power to ever have to do this. I'm not afraid of anything. I'm a guy. I'm not afraid of anything. Well, it turns out I think there's some things I'm afraid of. And as I've been writing those things out and confessing them and talking about them with my wife and some of the other people in my life and saying, maybe I am afraid to die. I'm 3 years from 50 years old. You can do the math later. Millennials, you'll need a calculator. That's a joke. I love you, millennials. I'm just totally joking. But that means I'm halfway to 100. Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to make it to 100. I don't know anyone who's 100. And I've had to look at this, and maybe part of my thing is I'm fearing my mortality a little bit. I mean, there's a lot of things I've been working through. Maybe some of it is I'm realizing I'm not going to live forever. I'm realizing I'm not in control of this. Maybe I'm not as in control of the second half of my life as I thought I was in the first half. Turns out that was all a mirage anyway. Because God's the one with all the power. The truth is, it's easy to believe that death is the end. Some of you maybe are dealing with that in a more real way than even I am. That you're staring down an illness or you're staring down a situation, your own mortality or your friends or your parents or your kids like Jairus. And I want you to know that this last story shows us that Jesus even has power over death. That what Jesus did on the cross for us sets us free from being enslaved to fear over sin or hell or the grave. We don't have to be afraid. We don't have to feel anxiety when we think about the end. So I want to encourage you today. I want to challenge you today to cross over to the good side of the lake. If the way you've dealt with God and your fears, the way you've dealt with him is approaching him in fear. I can't control the situation. I don't know what's going to happen in this situation. I don't understand the kind of power that you have in my life. I just invite you to cross over from fear to faith, to begin to approach him like Jairus had to do in his life and say, this just seems absolutely hopeless now. And Jesus just wants to say to you, no, don't think of it like that. Don't be afraid. Just believe. You think you're more concerned for this situation than I am. And Jesus is saying to you now, no, I actually care about it more than you do. That thing that is keeping you up at night, Jesus cares about it. And he wants to step in and show his omnipotence in your life if you'd only let him.